We have a very special night tonight with the artist John Himmelfarb, who will be much more entertaining and educational than me in talking about his art, and he has a lavalier as well. We've been very privileged this week to have John with us for a week-long residency. Not only do we get his great exhibition up that will run until the spring, but we've had John really working overtime for the museum and for the university. I don't think he knew exactly what he was getting in for when he signed up for this gig. Part of it is, if you've been into the exhibition, you know there's a mural on the back wall that measures 12 by 35 feet. It was a little bit difficult to hang the barely begun composition on a canvas that size, and I knew it was going to be very difficult for John to complete it. But part of this exhibition was that interactive feature. He spent the entire week from Saturday until really just finished up yesterday painting on scaffolding and ladders and step stools, and interspersed probably mercilessly too much with groups that came in from 2-year-olds up to college students, community members, each one engaging in conversation with him, critiquing him, offering him suggestions, and this is what John wanted, because he wanted it to be interactive. In fact, the first thing that John said when he came here is, "What do you think about this? I don't even know how to begin." But I knew that was just a sort of a segue into starting the conversation. So part of that exhibition component as well was a little hidden camera, not a drone flying around, but a little camera up on top of the ceiling where we were streaming the activity live during the week. So you could watch it in real time, and also with certain software scroll back and forth and see what would happen. And so really the most informative part of that was to see the artist at work. For people who aren't painters, and even for some painters who have a more methodical, kind of planned out course of action, I think it was an eye-opener. But for everyone coming in to see how the process is completed, this give and take and push and pull of the canvas. One interesting example of that is one day I came in and was talking to John's wife, Molly, who said, she never gets this opportunity at the studio to see her husband work. And she said, it's great, and I just didn't know how much work was in it. And then John came back to see us, and she said, I just love that little golden yellow spot. And he said, where? She said, below in the cargo area, there's a kind of a rainbow shape. And it's just lovely. So, we talked a little bit. I went away and did some work and came back maybe an hour later, and the entire truck and the painting was bathed in golden yellow. And so, he took that response to heart. Of course, the next morning I came in, and it was completely red. It was painted out entirely, except a little spot here and there. And I'm not going to interpret that activity. I'll leave that to you. But I think it does illustrate that idea that the artist takes chances and tests something out, and if it doesn't work, he changes and works spontaneously, and especially with an artist like John Himmelfarb. So I don't want to talk too much about his work because John knows it much better than I do. But I will give you a little bit of background. He was born in Chicago in 1946, and then grew up really to the west of the city, in maybe now they would call it exurbs, but in a rural area, and then went on with his life. He grew up in a family of artist parents, so that activity of drawing and art making was a part of his life, and it wasn't until later in college, when he was at Harvard University, that he turned toward the idea of working as a professional artist. John has had great success. He's held a studio in Chicago since 1970 and still works there, and also has a studio out in rural Wisconsin. But the fruits of that activity are in museum collections of major importance. British Museum, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, MoMA, Art Institute of Chicago, and of course the Crown, the Jule Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art, has a great painting of a truck, Resurrection, which in fact started this whole process of our thinking about having a show that placed that painting in context. So without too much further ado, I do want to thank John and Molly for being here with us, and I'm going to hold it at that because he has a list of people I think that he feels like he has some gratitude for, but really it's on our side. We're getting the best end of the deal. So he's been here a week. It's not only a welcome, but it's a bon voyage because John departs tomorrow. And we have him for another couple of hours, really. So enjoy the talk, and then I hope you, if you haven't seen the exhibition, rush back out before you stop to get an eat or a drink and see the show, and try to grab John, if you can, before he goes away. So please join me in welcoming John Himmelfarb.
Thank you, Dennis. Before I begin my formal remarks, I just want to address the comment that you made that I didn't know what I was getting into when I signed up to come. Back in 1985, I believe it was, not too many years after I first met Marilyn Laufer and her husband Tom Butler, they were running the Sioux City Art Center in Iowa, and they invited me to have a show of prints and drawings. And money is always in short supply, both for institutions and for artists. So Marilyn got a grant to get me to visit some of the local colleges and art departments in the region of Sioux City. I was there for a week. I visited sometimes 3 colleges in a single day. I drove thousands of miles. So when I was invited to come down here and Marilyn said, you know, they might arrange for me to meet with a few people, I knew full well what was in store. So I do have a few people that I'd like to thank. First, my wife, Molly Day, who's sitting down here. Can you wave your hand there? My career just wouldn't have happened, or wouldn't have happened the way it happened without Molly's support. So I thank her for that, and I also wanted to note that she just retired in June. And this is the first big art project of mine where she could come along. So it's just been really fun to do this whole project together. I want to thank Marilyn for making this happen and getting me down here. And Dennis Harper for your wonderful curatorial job. I have to say, when he sent me the list of the work he wanted for the show, I thought, it's just not enough work. I've seen the galleries. It's gonna, what's he thinking of, you know? And I trust people to do the right thing and to be artists of their own profession, so I didn't say anything. And when I got down here and I saw the show, I said, yep, he got it right. It just gave everything the right amount of space, and the pedestals were all the right size, and so I was thrilled. Todd Hall and Deli Robertson were preparators that took care of all the grunt labor of getting the show up and looking good. If you enjoyed that invitation, Janet Gwen's the one that did the design on that, and I've gotten comments from all around the country about what a wonderful invitation that was. I thought it was the best invitation anybody had ever done for me. Charlotte Hendricks has been in charge of doing video on the process of this exhibition. She's also been in charge of promoting it, and you've probably seen newspaper articles and TV shows and whatnot. She organized all of that. Mike Cortez, who's the IT guy that made the live stream happen. Scott Bishop, who organized the adult programs and is a university liaison. I think she was responsible for organizing the college art students to be over here on a number of occasions. Andrew Henley was in charge of the interaction with the K through 12 students, and I lost track of how many, but there were hundreds of K through 12 students that I met this week. Andrew also did the docent training, which I think worked out really well. I also wanted to thank Roger and Joyce Lathander for their early support of this exhibition through their contribution that allowed the museum to purchase Resurrection, one of the larger paintings in the show. And finally, Bob and Diana Hagler loaned us their house here in town for more than a week, and it just made the visit so relaxed compared to staying in a hotel. You know, it gave Molly and me room to spread out and unpack, and I just wanted to say how much that was appreciated. Well, I'm getting close to starting my talk. I find myself in a very difficult position, and that position is that I'm standing between you and the food and drink. So I'm cognizant of that, and I'll try to whip through my slides quickly and allow a little time for some question and answers at the end. Dennis mentioned that I grew up in a rural area west of Chicago in a family of artists. This is me out on the porch with an easel. My mother, trying to buy herself a little time, would put up this chalkboard, give me a jar of water and a brush, and I would paint, and it would evaporate, and I'd keep painting and keep painting and keep painting. And so I think that's where I got this feeling like that's the way to spend the day, is just making marks on something. It doesn't really matter what happens, just as long as you're busy making marks. That's my father at about the same time, working in the new house that he had designed out in the woods. That's a painting of my dad's, just to kind of give you some idea where I come from. He was trained at a number of art schools, including Art Students League, very traditional, but he became more and more modern as the decades went on. This is mid-50s. It's a group of people sitting on the steps or stone stoop of a Chicago building. So you can kind of pick out the faces and the slabs of rock stones. This is one of his more famous paintings. It was exhibited at the Art Institute. It was hung upside down. And the AP or UPI picked up this story, and it was all over the country. So that's one view of the house that I grew up in. So you can see how wooded it is and full of glass. So I think this woodland area influenced my work in many ways. That's am I still on? Yeah. That's my mother and me at a show at the Terra Museum in Chicago with a painting of my father's from the late 30s. My father was long gone by that point, but we were delighted that this work, which represents Jackson Park in Chicago at night in the summer in the late 30s, when people had no air conditioning, they spent the night in the parks. This is a painting of my mother's from probably the early 2000s. And that's me as a young artist trying to make a buck at a outdoor art fair. It didn't work. This is a few years back, but it gives you the knowledge that I do have 2 children as well as a wife. This is a couple of shots in my studio in Chicago. You can see a truck painting on the right, and on the left, I'm actually starting a truck painting. I wonder if that looks like the beginning of Resurrection. I never noticed that, so that painting's actually here. Another view in my studio, you can see some other truck paintings. I don't want you to think that trucks are the only thing I ever painted. So I'm trying to show you here some other styles, motifs that I followed over the years. I've done things that look like language, like hieroglyphics, pictographs, calligraphic things. This is probably from the late 70s, columns of writing like in pen and ink on rice paper, Japanese paper, something similar with a horizontal motif. And for a while I organized them to look like Western style communications, letters to people. In this case, it's a business letter with a letterhead and a inside heading, inside address. This is a lithograph, larger painting on paper, layering the writing styles one over another. That's about 6 feet long. This is the most, might be the most recent one that I've done. I thought for many years that I'd like to do a very large version of that, but I didn't feel ready. I didn't feel like I knew quite enough about the problems of doing that kind of drawing. But at some point, just a couple of years ago, it clicked in my head. I said, I think I'm ready now. And I rolled out this sheet of paper, which is 7.5 feet high and 12 feet long. And this kind of drawing requires that you do it within a short period of time, because if you stop and then come back a week or two later to work on it, your hand, the motion, the gesture changes, and you'll see an abrupt change in the drawing. So I did this in 4 days on my knees on a drawing table, because I knew that if I stopped, it wouldn't turn out right. This is related to the language work, other ways of organizing the material. I got interested in drawings from other people's drawings. These are based on antique dictionary illustrations. Similar style. Then I began looking at other artists' work and started doing my versions of their drawings. This is very early painting. For years I've had difficulty organizing. When people say, well, what do you do? Can you categorize your work? It seems like I just do so many different things. But recently I thought, well, if you think about the language things, that's been going on my whole career. That's kind of one body of work. And then another part of my work I would categorize as places where you could be, like a landscape or a theater setting. So this would fall into that category of, it looks like an industrial setting of some sort of city with some figures. This again is an early painting, early 70s. I kind of drew the shapes out and then painted them in a pop art style. This is a early lithograph. It's 30 by 40 inches. And I had just learned how to make prints. And if you, let's see, I've got a laser thing here. You see that? Who would have thunk? I mean, it didn't seem important to me at the time, but then as I got into this whole truck thing and I started looking back at earlier work, I kept finding little trucks hidden away. There's one right there, too, coming forward with a big section of pipe on its side. This is just typical of a painting style in the late 70s. Many of the paintings have animals and humans, sometimes interacting. So they're figures, and another big category for me are characters. Aside from the landscape and the calligraphic things. So here's a guy kind of reaching up to two houses. Here's a painting of a man reaching for a tree. This is late 70s. And an old friend from Chicago, Carol Gerhardt, whom I haven't seen for many years.
That's my painting.
She was driving back from Florida to West Virginia and detoured to get to this opening tonight. And she was reminding me that she owns this painting. And I did, in the early 80s, I did a series of black and white paintings, a man in a boat. And he accumulated all his material possessions, more and more stuff. And you'll see there's a guy in the water. There's no room for him on the boat because it's the guy in the boat here. There's his face, and he's got a leg hanging over the gunnel. But I've got, my camera and my easel and my brushes. They're all in there. I was feeling a little overwhelmed with the stuff in my life, and I did quite a few brush and ink drawings after I finished with that series about the man in the boat. And eventually it turned into a series with a large face staring straight out, and another face over here in profile. There's the nose, and a mustache, and lips, and teeth, and another lip, and then a dog in between, barring his teeth. I think this drawing is another one of those monsters that's like 7.5 by 12 feet, and it's brush and ink. And I stayed with that style for 4, 5, 6 years. Here I'm kind of making fun of myself at this point with the hand of the artist drawn in there. Then after I finished, that was for me, that was a pretty long series, 5 or 6 years. So I did a couple of years where I didn't really know exactly where I was going, but I was working with kind of organic plant materials. And then did something that could be considered, again, a form of landscape. This was the last show I had in New York with my first New York dealer, Terry Dittenfuss. Then I started a group called the Inland Romance, based on forms seen in the city, like ironwork, things that hold up bridges, railway tracks, and seen from another point of view could be interpreted as maps. This was really the beginning of that. In a way, that great big truck that you'll see on the wall in the gallery, the 35-footer that I did this week, has a lot of similarities to this painting. So I began to simplify it and get rid of all the layers and just get down to a couple of colors. And then I started to break it up. Instead of having those patterns cover the whole painting from one edge to the other, I just broke them down into Tinker Toy size pieces and started to move them around independently. There I am with one of my first really large paintings. This is similar in size. That's about 12 by 30 feet. This one I did for a show near Chicago. I actually started this just as 9/11 was happening, and I denied at the time that had any influence on the painting, but I think looking back I have to feel like it's a response to what was happening. These are some more of the Inland Romance paintings. Here's another large one. This one's 65 feet long, and it was also done on a deadline. I was doing it at a college, and I had to do it in 2 weeks. This is a 15 by 20 foot painting. I did two that size for the Delta Airlines terminal in Boston. So if you're in Boston at the airport and you have a little extra time, walk over to the Delta terminal. It's a little bit of a hike, but most people that go there don't see them because they're walking through those doors to get to security, and they're looking at their tickets. And I meet somebody later who says, "Oh, came back from Boston." I said, "Did you see my paintings?" And they said, "Oh no, I didn't. I was in the Delta terminal. I didn't see anything." You know? Those industrial forms that formerly covered the whole painting broke up into sections and became characters, much like the people and animals in some of the earlier ones. So these two things look like cranes, but they also kind of look like they're fighting with each other. Same thing here, the two orange things. I call this, what did I call this one? Bug House Square. Bug House Square was a place in Chicago where people would get up and give unpaid for speeches, political debating area. This is one of the last of the Inland Romance paintings, and it's actually owned by Steve and Debbie Mueller, who are here from Chicago, also right down here. A lot of the work in this show was facilitated in some way by Steve. Now this is an outgrowth of my work with the calligraphic or language-like works. I was in a big show in Korea in the 90s, and I got fascinated with the signage for the stores and shops where their letters were very fat and had a lot of body to it. From that painting, I got the idea that those characters that were in each little color area, I thought, well, those could actually stand out and become three-dimensional sculptures. And I had not been a sculptor up to this point, but I started cutting out those shapes or shapes like that from cardboard and putting melted wax on it to get a texture, sending it to a foundry, and making sculpture. This is a tapestry in that same style that I had done in Peru. But based on those little bronze sculptures, I applied to the Kohler Foundation in Wisconsin, where they make the bathtubs. And Kohler Factory invites artists to come and work there. So I applied and I got accepted. This is a ceramic tile mural for the Transit Authority in Chicago. That same style. This is a 4-foot-high ceramic vase. This is a backsplash I did for a couple in New York for their kitchen. This is a stone that I painted as a child in a class I took with my mother about American Indian craft and art. And it's just stayed around in the family for years. And one day I was looking at it, I said, "Look at those characters. I haven't changed a bit." Doing the same darn thing. So as I was about to go to Kohler, a good friend of mine, Mac Horniker, was teaching in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and he invited me to come down for a few days and work with him to learn something about Kohler's method of sand casting. And we did this piece out of cast aluminum. So I began to learn a little bit about the process. This is me at Kohler with one of the large molds, sand molds. You can see the shape on the second square back there that's going to be cast. And there I am. I got trained on the forklift. And that's the piece that was cast out of that big block of sand. Steve Mueller helped me a lot with this one too. This is a wax that later became a gate. These are the gates that were cast for a couple who have a large sculpture garden in Nebraska. You'll see I've done a lot of drawings on old card catalog cards from libraries, and there's a work in the show here that you'll see done that way. So this is just a few examples of that. All right, so we're up to trucks here, the real thing. I didn't sit down one day and decide that I was going to paint trucks. What happened is I went to the Art Institute of Chicago for some reason, and I wandered through the galleries, and I saw a painting by Dubuffet, who's always been one of my favorite artists. It was a painting I'd never seen before. I don't really remember now what the content was in terms of the subject matter of the painting, but I remember that I was fascinated with his technique in this painting. He'd painted a background of just some abstract color areas that didn't have a lot of definition, and then he'd mixed up some very liquid black paint and drawn something over it. And I just felt like I wanted to do that. It had such graphic pull or punch. So I went back and I painted that green and blue background with a little pink. And then I started on the right my kind of structures I was doing for Inland Romance, some kind of industrial looking structure that typically kind of covered the whole canvas. But I stopped at that point, went back, and then I started painting it again. And without any real conscious effort, it turned into a truck. And I stood back and looked at that and said, wow, that's really cool. You know, and I didn't think too much about what trucks mean or why I liked it. I just said, I got to do another truck. And I think this was the next one. So I kind of ditched the crane. On the first one, there was a crane on the right and the truck interacting with it. Here it's just the truck. And for several paintings, I didn't think too much about why is this appealing to me. I just went with it. I tend, because I've had a lot of experience with not only with visual art, but I've spent a lot of time reading literature. I was a musician as a young person, so I've listened to a lot of music. When something hits me in the gut as feeling like it has some importance, I just trust that. I don't overanalyze it. So these are truck paintings that are not in the show, but after a while, you know, after a year or more, I began to think, well, yeah, I wonder what it is about these trucks. So I have thought about it, but I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to figure it out yourself, but it won't take you long. So I've done a few black and white ones. Here it is, coming all the way back to having the crane on the left side, somehow interacting with the truck, and you see the truck from the back end. Something funny that I'd forgotten about is that the crane has a skull sitting there. Some of you have seen a sculpture of mine on the grounds called Penelope. It's built from a real truck. I built that 2 summers ago, and just before it was shipped down here, it had some mechanical problems that needed repair, and I was able to get it to a young mechanic who worked nights and weekends on it. He had a day job, and he got it. After the semi-truck pulled into his driveway to load it up, he was still working on it for another hour and a half. So that's how close it was. But as I got into the truck Penelope to back it onto the semi in the dark, by that time it was night, I noticed something on the seat. It was a skull, a plastic skull. I asked the mechanic, you know, what's with the skull? He says, I just feel it should be in there. He said, I want this to go with it. So if you look out there, you'll see that plastic skull that he added to the sculpture. And now I see, well, it was preordained here with this. This is also in the show, and it again comes back to the truck being tied to a larger landscape with cranes and hoses and pipes and things. There's a painting in the show called Hero that I think came just before this, and this simplifies the image quite a bit and creates a sky and a ground. And you'll see in the 35-foot painting I did this week, I used that same device of a simple band representing the sky and the ground. This is a lithograph, another graphite drawing. There's one in the show. Graphite on raw canvas. This is another cast iron piece that I did at Kohler. A small bronze. Many of the trucks are carrying a load or a burden or a history. Many others have tools or equipment as if they have tasks or things that they want to get done. You'll also notice that none of them have drivers. The only one that has a driver is the one that's parked outside, and the driver is me. Here I am at Kohler, at the cast iron foundry, and I'm working up with plasticine, which is a type of clay that doesn't dry, a model for a piece in this show called Greek Opera. This was a much heavier casting than I'd been able to do before, and Steve drove up from Chicago for the weekend to help me with the casting. It was a huge project. This is the plasticine sitting in a steel flask. It's been powdered, so the plasticine will release from the rosin-bonded sand that's poured in to create the mold. And that powder didn't work very well in terms of releasing, so it took us hours and hours and hours to pull all the clay out. But what happened at this point was a forklift moved this under a machine that poured rosin-bonded sand all around the clay, and Steve and I and my studio assistant were jumping around in there packing the sand down before it hardened to create the mold. Then we had to pull the plasticine out. We thought we had plenty of time, and we started Sunday morning so that it could be ready to be poured on Monday when the crew came back to the factory. And we knew it had to be done by then because we weren't allowed to be out on the floor during the week. But it turned out we couldn't get the clay out. It just took forever, and we had trouble turning the mold over. So we started at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, and we left the foundry about 6:30 Monday morning. There you can see the forklift with the bucket pouring the iron into the mold. And the smoke coming up, that's the gases escaping from the mold as the iron goes in. It's a pretty dramatic thing to watch, and it doesn't always work out. This is a photo of it when it's just been sandblasted, so it's the color of the iron before it's rusted. This is a scrapyard in Wisconsin where I find most of the objects that I use to make my sculptures with real trucks. And I just love going to this place. It's really, making these trucks, I think, is just an excuse to go visit the scrapyard. That's at the same scrapyard. This was the first truck that I made up there, and I found a client for it before I finished it, and we discussed, I hadn't thought too much about color, but we ended up deciding to paint this. Steve came up to Wisconsin, helped me take this apart. At this stage, this was all just pieces were not welded together. They were just kind of clamped or wired in place so I could compose it. Then Steve helped me take it apart, take it to Chicago, get it welded in his shop, and painted. Actually, we got all the pieces painted first and then reassembled it. And here it is installed in Lincoln, Nebraska. This was the next big truck sculpture I did. It was a Rio Speedwagon, 1949, I think. So I bought it. It had a big grain box on it, and because it had been in use as a farm truck until fairly recently. So I figured out how to get that box off and then started from scratch. These are some of the pieces from the scrapyard, including this is the back. This is a dump truck bed, or half of one, sitting up on blocks, so I could compose the cylinders on it. I did this on Penelope too. I turned the dump truck bed around so it's on the truck backwards. There I am with a friend's piece of equipment that I could use for lifting the heavier objects up. And there I'm getting the final piece up there with a little help from my son. They're very physical pieces, which I think is one reason that I enjoy them. This is a piece in the show. It's a woodblock print on blocks of wood. It's one of those little word games that I enjoy. It's a combination word game and visual game. So the blocks of wood are cut out exactly the same as the sheets of paper, and the blocks of wood are all bolted together. You'll see this. This is in the show. This is steel plate. This is a ceramic piece that I did. An awful lot of what I do is done with the help of other people. In this case, I was again visiting the folks in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. I was invited back, and two of the prints in this show were done on this same trip as this ceramic piece. I told the ceramic students about my process of going to scrap yards to find things I could work with, and I said to them, I don't know how to throw clay, you guys do. Make me a scrap yard of parts, make me a bunch of stuff, and I've just got a few hours to make something, so it'll work better if I already have a bunch of shapes to work from. So this was kind of the collaboration that resulted. And later, I liked this piece so much that I had my friend who has the bronze foundry make a mold from it and cast it in bronze as well. I can't even remember how I got started with plywood. This was, I think this was the first plywood sculpture I made. This was back at Kohler. I made this piece at Kohler out of wax, but I never cast it there. I somehow felt I loved the piece and I was afraid I'd wreck it. So I later got it cast in bronze. There it is. So after making that first piece in plywood, I thought I knew all about plywood, and I decided to make a big piece. It was 10 feet long, 6 feet high. It looked just like this, but it was plywood. And again, my friend Steve came to me and he said, John, there's no way that could be outside. It's a big piece. It should be made out of steel. It's half-inch plywood. Just translate it to half-inch steel and be perfect. So I took my wood sculpture apart, and together Steve and I translated that onto the steel plates, cut it out, and with the help of his company, Vector in Chicago, we got it to this stage. And there's Penelope. For a while I thought I should be taking Penelope and similar things around to shows myself. So I bought this old pickup truck, 89 Cheyenne, 1-ton dually. I bought a long trailer, and here I've got it all loaded up. This was January last year, and in a snowstorm I drove it from Wisconsin down to a show at the Brower Museum at Valparaiso University, And I began to wonder why I was thinking that I should be driving these things around myself. I was so frightened. This is, lots of people send me photographs of trucks they think I'd be interested in. And this one was great. It really got me started on the truck that I did this past summer, which is this truck. This is the one I finished this summer. This is quite a bit smaller than Penelope. It's just more like a regular pickup size, except it's also a dually. But it was just the cab and the frame. I had the bed and everything else is added. So I've been sent several pictures like this from different parts of the world, and I haven't figured out how to do this. But it's on my agenda. I love it, but a lot of the luggage on these things is made from that woven fiberglass bags, and I think that's just not archival enough. Eventually, I think the sun would destroy those. So anyway, if you see something like this of mine a few years from now, you won't be surprised. These are some work similar to what's in the show. I got fascinated with just simplifying the fronts or backs of trucks to just a very few lines. I won't have a chance to point this out in the gallery, so I'll do it here. Here you can see the back of the truck, and there's a lot of space all around it. Artists refer to that as negative space. It suddenly occurred to me after quite a few of these that I could use the canvas shape as the shape of the truck, so that the only negative space left is down here underneath the truck and between the tires. But the main box up there, the object occupies the full canvas. I'm trying to become more and more loose and abstract with this theme. This is actually the back of a tractor of a semi without the box on the back. And here I haven't even completed the box. I'm just using a few lines. This is, you can gradually see it's the front of the truck. In some ways it's beginning to look like that big face that I did in the 80s of the brush and ink, looking straight out. This is, I believe my inspiration for this was the back of a semi that the doors were open, but there were a kind of a chain gate hanging down inside it. This is very simplified, just the back of two halves of a semi. So there's one on the left, one on the right, but it really looks a lot like a Brancusi to me. And at this point, about all you can pick out are some tires down here, and vaguely possibly the shapes here of the back of the trucks. This is the way the 35-foot painting that I did this week looked when it arrived here. I had done this in my studio some years back, and I thought it was done. But I looked at the pictures of it later, and I wasn't happy with it. So when Dennis asked me if I had, Dennis knew I did some large-scale paintings, and he asked if I had any that were trucks. I said, well, I have one, but it's not any good, but maybe I could work on it. So that's where the idea for this project evolved. I think that's my last slide. We've got just a few minutes here where I could answer questions, and then when we're done, I'm going to go to the gallery, the main gallery there, and sign the painting that I did this week. So if you'd like, before you grab your food and drink, you could come in and help celebrate the completion of the painting. So that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
In one of your paintings, I think I saw a little gold piece. Was that the painting that
No, I think the one she was talking about was the one that I worked on was 3 days into this painting.
Well, the one I saw was, the gold part was about the size of a quarter.
Yes.
Do you do any preliminary small sketches for these things, or just start out big?
Sometimes for some of the sculptures, I'll make a little model before I go to the full size. But the preliminary drawings are really just that I do a lot of drawings, and I don't take one of those drawings and then try to make it bigger, but it's all practice so that when I do approach a larger work, I can approach it with the same confidence that I approach drawing on a little library card. It's just doing it over and over again. I wouldn't say I never do it, a preparatory thing, but it's unusual. Yes?
I just have to ask, when you did the REO Speedwagon, does it have a radio that plays the music?
It should. I have to rewire it to 12 volts if I'm going to do that, get a radio in there. The first two, the Rio Speedwagon and the one that was painted red, those are both in private collections in Nebraska now.
John, the other day you told us that you don't come up with titles for the paintings or the works of art usually until it's complete, except this one, at one point you thought it was complete and it did have a title of Grace, and you considered as you were working on it that it was evolving from that same, character. Do you think we're going to have to change the label?
I kind of determined that to save the museum staff the work of changing the label, I wouldn't retitle it till after the show. So for the time being, this painting remains in a state of grace.
Do you have any thoughts about how it might go?
I'm pretty intuitive about that sort of thing. It won't be something that I think a lot about, but if I wake up someday and say, you know what, that painting really should be Bob, I'll call it Bob. But until that day, I'm not going to worry about it.
Except for the drawing in which you could see a driver, as you say, I never saw a driver in any of your other trucks. What's the reason?
I'm trying to emphasize the anthropomorphic quality of these trucks. These trucks don't really have much at all to do with trucks. There's no beautiful portraits of a Mack truck of a certain era. They're just metaphors for human experience. And I think if I put the drivers in there, it would suddenly be something else. And again, I didn't think about that to start with. I didn't deliberately leave the drivers out. I'm not that intellectual about the way I approach my work. But then later I noticed, hey, there's no drivers. Why is that? And then I came to me. Yes?
What do you think, honoring your 7 hours?
I have a truck purchased for next summer. I can only work on these big outdoor trucks in the summer because I don't have a studio big enough to, drive them into. So I have the truck purchased, and I have an idea for it, which is, I think I showed you 2 photographs of the scrapyard. The second one, things were all piled up high. That was a little untypical. Usually those piles are made out of seed sowers, cutters, pretty horizontal type of equipment, have a lot of horizontal lines. So when you see them stacked up 15 or 20 feet, you see a lot of horizontal lines within them, but they're jumbled. They're somewhat similar to the design quality. If you see farmers clearing trees from around their fields to expand the fields, and then they stack them all up in the middle of the field, either to rot or burn. They create a similar kind, very interesting pattern. You might have seen work by Tom Nakashima. He's done a lot of work on those brush and log piles. So I've talked to the scrapyard people about whether I could do this, and they said they'd help me take some of these long horizontal pieces of equipment down and torch cut them into sections, pieces that I can manhandle somehow and work with. So I'm going to try to compose something that has the feeling of the piles by the scrapyard, or the piles of lumber on the back of a truck about the size of Penelope, but it's a 53 Chevy, and it's in better mechanical shape than anything I've worked on so far, so I'm hoping to save myself some trouble that way. So beyond that, that's very specific. I've been pretty preoccupied with getting this show on the road, so to speak. I do have a show coming up in Chicago this summer, and I don't know what's going to be in it. I haven't done much painting for a while, so I have a feeling that in March and April I'm going to be spending a lot of time painting before the summer construction season starts in Wisconsin. But I don't know where that'll go.
Would you say there's some kind of intended sarcasm between a truck that could be executed task on the field with its weird protruding shapes, and a truck that is in a landfill, which is with its broken pieces? The fact that a truck can look like anything because it can be executing so many different tasks and can surprise the viewer with its weird equipment might look as like a truck in a dockyard with its broken pieces. I was wondering if there was some kind of humor and sarcasm in your design about maybe this parallel.
Not exactly sarcasm, because I could be wrong here, my wife could correct me, but I don't think I'm a particularly sarcastic person. I make a lot of jokes and bad puns and things,
well,
but...
in my culture, sarcasm is a good one.
Oh, okay.
Because I realize that in the United States it's...
Yeah, but there's something called, well, you all are familiar with realism, different aspects of realism in art, and then there is something that's even more realistic. There's surrealism, and then there's hyperrealism. Dwayne Hansen's sculpture looks so real that you walk into a sculpture gallery and you think the guard is a little strange because he's not moving, and then after a while you realize he's not breathing, and then you realize it's a sculpture. It's spooky how real it is. I like to claim that I have outdone the hyperrealists with Penelope and the Rio Speedwagon, because not only does my sculpture look like a truck with a lot of salvaged metal on it, it actually is a truck with a lot of salvaged metal on it. So the difference is just the way I've organized the material. So to me, that, I don't know if that's sarcasm, but there's humor. To me, that's kind of funny.
Playful humor.
Hey, John, are you doing
I do badly. I weld badly. I'm getting better. The one piece in this show is called Honor. That's made out of steel plate, and it's not painted. It's just kind of rusted a bit. That's the piece I learned. I began to learn how to weld on, and again, I hate to keep bringing his name up, but Steve Mueller worked with me on that to kind of teach me how to pull the trigger and make something happen. I tried it on my own, and I forgot to plug it in or didn't turn the gas on or something. It made a lot of noise, but it didn't stick. But every year that I do it, I'm learning some things. So, but I generally, like Penelope, I had somebody work after me to check my welds and see if they, because I don't want those things falling off when I'm driving down the road. I did drive Penelope last year. Right after I finished it in Wisconsin, I was invited to show it at an exhibition about 35 miles from where I built it, and I asked the mechanic who had gotten it in decent shape, I said, do you think it can make it up those steep hills, and will it go 35 miles? He says, yeah, no problem. John, I think I've learned that he figures, well, it's my problem if it doesn't, I'm not sure I'll believe him in the future, but it did make that trip just fine and back, so. Anything else, or shall we go sign the painting and find some food and drink? Okay.